compassion for them because they were troubled and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to the disciples, "The size of the harvest is bigger than you can imagine, but there are few workers. Therefore, plead with the Lord of the harvest and send out workers for his harvest."
Great, thank you. As usual, we're going to begin with reactions to those 3 verses. What are your initial reactions to those?
In verse 36, and we have learned in the previous lessons how the crowds throng Jesus whenever he's in town. And so the first verse, when he saw them, he had compassion for them because they seemed helpless like sheep without a shepherd. And so when I first read that, I thought about, they're following him. It seems like, they camp overnight, maybe days and weeks at a time. They're probably looking really horrible and just hungry for the word. And, he's saying that they have no structure. They have no leader. They want so much from him. And he just had compassion on them because they were lost. That's the way I saw it.
Anyone else?
This was the scripture I was thinking of yesterday when I was describing the structure of a small church. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of been my experience in a larger church as well, where you have only a few people that are willing to do the work, the few that will volunteer. The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. And so therefore you have to use good judgment in terms of how many activities that you have and overlapping and all of that, because it's going to be the faithful few that are going to come out.
Yeah. Anyone else?
Well, you know what? I'm just in verse 36, and he talks about he has compassion because Jesus, being all-knowing, he knows the emptiness that these people have, and so when we know what people's situations are, we can empathize with them. Just like for our modern day experience, we see the people that's protesting in Washington, D.C., and the people protesting on the outside of the McDonald trial thing. So when we know what people are going through, we can have compassion for them or feel or even empathize with them.
Okay. Anyone else?
Because I think the Pharisees had been going through so much. They had a rule for a rule and a rule for that rule. And Jesus just felt for them, I'm thinking, because they had gone through a lot, and he had compassion for them.
Mm-hmm. And aside from the laws and the rules that were recorded in Genesis through Deuteronomy, they would make things up as the need arose.
Mm-hmm. Wow. That's
And you know what? And just like say, with some of us, we were so lost that it had to be somebody that had pity on us. We was lost. Our lives was empty. We didn't have nothing inside of us, and somebody had to come and say, "Well, let me tell you about this man here that might help you." Rather than, because some of us was putting other things, we were trying to fill ourselves up with other things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Anyone else? Let's look at some of these questions. This passage begins with Jesus' seeing the crowds. How does Jesus' background influence how he views the crowds? I think you kind of alluded to that a little bit, Greg, but let's go into that a little bit deeper. How does Jesus' background influence how he sees the crowds?
Wow.
What is Jesus' background?
He had humble beginnings.
Okay.
Do we know about it?
Well, he sees the crowd through his humility. He sees the crowd through... that's interesting because I hadn't expected. That's just kind of, woo.
Yeah,
because, we could see the same crowd,
Mhm.
but based on our backgrounds, see something completely different. You know, we might see this as a bunch of people,
Mhm.
you know, like the disciples saw.
Right.
These people, they hungry, they need to go they better go to that McDonald's and get something to eat.
Yeah.
Because that little lunch we got, that's for us. But others of us, like Jesus, would look at the crowd and our hearts would drop. I think I said to someone at the table, when we were intaking people, there's a question that they ask about food stamps.
Mhm.
And that question for me, it always takes me back to a time when we were growing up and my mom was in grad school and she could not work and because she had to do her internship. And for that year, we had food stamps. So it always touches me when I ask that question. And that's why I prefer to just turn the screen around and point to the question so that they can answer it. So somebody who had never had food stamps before would not understand that,
Right.
you know, and would just ask the question, you know. But when you had to stand in the line with them, you know, it does something to you.
Mhm.
And so to ask somebody that when you know that many times they don't want to be on them, it does something to you.
Mhm.
And with the intake too, Reverend Mel, when we ask that question, they tell you it's like
Mhm.
getting nothing.
Right,
They get $10.
right.
They get $15. I said, for the entire month? And they said, yeah. And they said, well, will that affect how much food I get? I said, no, it's just a question that we will ask, and we will ask every month. So we try to put them at ease that it does not, even if you get $15, it does not affect what you get here.
Right.
So, yeah, your heart goes out to those people, and they have needs.
Mhm.
So many of them.
Greg, you had
But
something.
you know what? Both of these verses that we are studying from, both of them use the adjective helpless, describe them as helpless. And what happens is that, that contributes to how we look down and how we treat the lesser or the poor or people in need. Other people, you know what? If you don't have God in your heart, you have to consider how we treat those people that have less than what we do.
Yeah. And I think the New King James Version also uses the adjective weary.
Mm-hmm.
They're weary and they're helpless and troubled.
And it's just not, because I'm reading this book, and it's nonfiction, and it's about this lady's son that's dying of cancer. And I'm telling you, I'm reading this book, and the tears are just running down my eyes, because it's true.
Mm-hmm.
And all the things that people have to go through, so you do feel their compassion for them, and so I can understand, I can hear what Jesus is saying. He's got compassion for these people, and we do have compassion for people.
So we've looked at Jesus' human side. He was fully human and fully divine.
Yes.
So if we look at Jesus' divine side, how does that background influence how he saw Christ?
Well, if you look at his divine side, in my opinion, is he already knows what their needs are, and he sees all these different needs and all these different people. And of course, it touches him to his core because it's so many. It's so many. And, how did they get there? I mean, he knows how they got there, but when you see that many people in need at one time, it has to affect you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let's look at question 2 then. In the modern day, how does our background influence the way we react to situations we encounter? You already talked about the food stamps example. Sometimes we look at situations through those things that have either hurt us the most
Mm-hmm.
or brought the most joy to us.
Mm-hmm.
Let's explore some of those.
Or even some things that delivered us.
Yes.
The things that happened. And I firmly believe God delivered you from something to minister to someone else, that same thing. He don't do it just for us. He do it for us to give back to somebody else that may be in that pain or anguish or whatever the case may be. You know, because you cannot minister to me if you, not really, if you hadn't had those food stamps.
Absolutely.
You know, we can't relate.
Right. And then I'm thinking about people who have suffered through instances, let's say, of rejection in their lives. They're always looking to embrace people and to bring them in, and they filter their perceptions through that lens.
Right.
There are other examples.
I had a girlfriend, her mother died and she was 9, she's 70 now. And her compassion, and she wasn't the oldest, but they lived in the South and they had to till the soil and all of that, take the clothes to the rock and all of that, and as children. So she has a lot of compassion for children because she knows what she had to go through in her youth.
This question puts me in the mind of politicians.
Yes.
Okay.
And the fact, not all of them, but the vast majority of them are rich.
Yeah.
They're very wealthy. And so, but they're governing people who are not.
Right.
And they've never known what it meant. Even this person that runs this country, what was it, how many thousands when he was 8 years old, a month? You know, he doesn't understand what it means to not have. So how can you make decisions for my life? And the vast majority of the people that are in the country are not in that top 5% or whatever it is that are wealthy. And that's always been so interesting to me, that those are the people that we tend to send. And then as I was driving in, someone was talking about how there was a picture of a huddle about this whole Kavanaugh issue, and it was only older white men. And nobody seems to think that there's a problem with that.
Right.
And when this lady brought it up, the man had an attitude about it and tried to twist. Oh, now you're saying old people shouldn't vote. You know, that kind of game stuff. And he knew exactly what she was saying. How can you make a decision for women? How do you understand what it means to have been raped or to have been sexually harassed? You don't. And you're not talking to anybody or including anybody that could possibly help you with that kind of feeling.
Yeah, we've had, I talked to some guys, older men, well, not older, but mid-40s. And they're siding with this guy. I mean, you're going to hurt this guy's career because of something that happened 33 years ago? And I said, do you have daughters? Yeah. I said, I know you do. One's 15 and one is 17. What are you going to tell your daughter if 20 years from now she tells you about an incident that happened to her last week and you didn't know? Oh, they wouldn't do that. They would tell me what's going on. And I said, if they love their dad, they wouldn't want to expose their father to that experience because A, you told me not to go where I went. B, if I tell you what happened to me, then I'll be lesser in your eyesight because I am too now a woman. And then the way you treat other women, I can see that I don't want to be treated that way. And I said, we really have to be.
He might go to jail because he might do something to you.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Exactly.
See? So.
Yeah. Let's hear from Greg.
You know, I was looking at that. You know, a lot of us, before we came to Christ, even those of us that had humble backgrounds, you know what, all we thought about was ourselves. And before we knew Christ, we thought about ourselves. When we got Christ in our lives, then we became concerned about others and did things because they were right, you know. Because I remember before what happened is I did things that if it would help me, I helped you. If you would help me, it was a payback for everything. Nowadays, I do things out of compassion, and sometimes we have to do the right thing, even if it does not make us feel good.
And you have to keep in mind that some people's version of the truth, and they truly believe this, their truth is different from
It's
your
amazing
truth.
to see it. Ooh.
I'm thinking of one of the politicians was asked how many homes, how many houses he owned. And he had to pause and think about it. He said, is it 7, 8?
Yes.
Some people have no home at all.
Yeah.
So that
And you gotta
influences how they view that situation, Jim?
Yeah, I was listening to you guys, and I can't keep quiet.
Okay.
I saw something today that basically said, whenever the people of privilege make a decision that benefits the privilege, it's the other people who suffer
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
every single time. So if you have politicians making decisions about policy in this country based upon what's going to benefit them,
Mhm.
it's going to be at the expense of everybody else.
Exactly.
You know, and I think you're seeing that in full form.
Oh, yeah.
And then I was thinking about what Jesus saw. You know, he had this unusual compassion because he could see that the people were suffering,
Mhm.
even though he had more power and privilege than anyone. He was, you know, he was the Word, but yet he had compassion. You know, so it's just amazing to me.
Yeah.
And sometimes we're not even trying to react in a negative way,
Mhm.
but your background, you don't know it. You don't see it, just like the crowds. We don't necessarily see the same thing.
Mhm.
I see, oh, they're just so trifling. They're just so, you know,
Mhm.
and you see something different. And that's why we fellowship together, so that we can talk to one another, so that we can help each other. And that's what bothers me about our modern day politicians. If they're basically wealthy and they're squeezing out everybody else, you can't possibly hear all the sides to the story.
Mhm.
And let me just say this. I'm not trying to say that Kavanaugh's passed, because everybody got a pass.
Exactly.
I don't think nobody at this table wants somebody digging up your past.
Mhm.
Okay, I don't. You know, there's just some things that's supposed to go to the grave.
Right.
Okay, but but the concern I have about him is the fact that he's lying. Number one, he's a liar.
Mhm.
Okay, you got busted.
Mhm.
Just admit it and apologize. But also because he's so mean too.
Yes.
And he is going to sit on the Supreme Court
Mhm.
and make decisions. And there's some other things I won't say because I don't want to offend anybody
Right.
that he stands for,
Mhm.
that I don't necessarily agree with.
Mhm.
So I'm not saying it's my decision is not solely based on his past. What he did, if he did it, was horrible.
Mhm.
It was absolutely deplorable.
And I didn't see any, and to be a Supreme Court justice, I didn't see any compassion
Exactly.
in anything that he said in defending himself. It's I, me, and this is what I am. And because you
It's
said
privilege
it,
talking.
that's what you think it is. But you had no compassion. Even if you thought she was mistaken, he could have said, you know, I don't know what happened to her. I feel sorry for what happened to her, and I know that she's probably, but that wasn't me. But I can feel what happened to her is very devastating to her. He had no compassion.
He did say he had compassion for her because he feels that she chose the wrong person to accuse.
He said
to
that.
understand. He said he felt sorry for her, that she couldn't remember where she had been, how she left, and how she got there. They all said that. But she does remember the beer she drank, the one can. And from there, they went blank, except for when she felt the rape. And I was waiting to hear her say she had been raped, but she never did say that. She said that he had roped her. So that's the white person's word for rape, I assume.
Well, the main thing is that he's a judge
Mm-hmm.
already, right? Can you be on the Supreme without being a judge prior
No.
to that? That's scary.
Mm-hmm.
And
But that's privilege.
That's
and
privilege.
he's going in biased because he's going to make his decisions
That's
based
right.
on what he's gone through. And so
Exactly.
he's not going to have
His
compassion.
background.
That's right.
Yeah.
His background,
His
the
background.
lens that he
Yes.
sees things
Yes.
through.
Right.
So if a case like that ever came before him, he would not be able to be neutral.
Exactly.
He would not be able to look at that objectively. And
Just
that's
like
a
our-
problem.
Just like 45. You
Right.
can't
And
look
a
at it
judge is not
objectively.
supposed to be like that.
You can't look at it.
Well, that's why they have so many justices on the Supreme Court, because each of them brings a slightly different perspective to
Mm,
bear on the
supposedly.
issues, at least they're supposed to, they used to.
But if you have someone who's pulling in all of the people who think like him,
Exactly.
that's, you know,
Yeah,
doesn't help
exactly.
much.
That's a flaw in the system,
Mhm.
isn't it?
Isn't it?
Let's relate this to discipleship. What lessons do we learn here as disciples that we should take away and apply as we try to convince people that they should follow Christ? What are some of the ones?
Well, I think we named like 3 of them. I think it's 3. First of all, we have to look at people with compassion. Try to understand where they're coming from and what their experience is. And no matter what our background is, sometimes we have to put self behind and try to be objective to what other people have gone through in their lives, right? So we didn't necessarily have to go through that experience, but at least have compassion.
Right, and realize that there are other ways of looking at things, not
right.
just the one right way.
Right.
Yeah.
And our sole purpose is to plant the seed.
Mm-hmm.
And the Bible said they were saved by the blood of the Lamb and the words of our testimony. And it seems like the people that I've come in, they've gone through what I've gone through. So I can tell them, you know, and even if not, I can just relate to the Word of God. And so I think that's what we're not trying to hammer it in them.
Mm-mm.
We're just trying to, you number 1, she number 2, and so forth and so on, until the Word, because God knows the day, the minute, the hour, if and when we're going to choose Him over the world. And so it is our task to be the disciple out there, to go tell them
Right.
about, you know, I heard this guy say, I'm just a beggar trying to tell somebody where to get something to eat.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And Reverend Mel might have a different testimony or approach
Exactly.
than I or Juanita or Andrea. And so we might be sent to minister to different people, and we're going to cover a little bit of that later on. Let's look at this third question briefly. Discuss the metaphors of shepherding and harvesting. In what ways do these concepts apply to the disciples?
Well, you know what? As we sit up under leadership, we have to take heed. You know what? Jesus is warning them that these assignments are not easy, and we have to understand that as we are on this journey with Christ, you know what? That these jobs are not gonna be easy, and He tells them to pray to the Lord. In the King James, He tells them to pray to the Lord, because you know what? We need God is the only one who can help us with this journey. So you know what? We don't ever know what's going on. We think pastors have easy jobs. We think whatever everybody thinks everybody else's assignment is easy, and He tells them, and He's indicating to them that these are not easy jobs. Even in the early days when the men worked the fields and built the houses, the wives or somebody had to bring them their meals or something in order for them to keep going. So He tells them, the part of the pray is for God to give you some help in these situations as you are out there doing it. When you work in the harvest, God knows that these people can't do it by themselves. So you pray to God to send you help.
And here they use the Lord of the harvest to describe God. But elsewhere they kind of soften that, but God is the Lord of the harvest, and we're to pray to the Lord of the harvest to give us what we need as we make this journey. Good discussion. Let's move on to the next segment. Could I get Reverend Melody to read Matthew 10, 1 through 5, 8, please?
He called His 12 disciples and gave them authority over unclean spirits to throw them out and to heal every disease and every sickness. Here are the names of the 12 apostles. First, Simon, who is called Peter, and Andrew his brother, James, the son of Zebedee, and John, his brother, Philip, and Bartholomew, Thomas, and Matthew, the tax collector, James, the son of Alphaeus, and Thaddeus, Simon the Canaan, and Judas, who betrayed Jesus. Jesus sent these 12 out and commanded them.
Okay. Lots there. I have lots of questions here too. We might not get through all of these questions. But these 4.5 verses are loaded with information. In verse 1, Jesus summons or calls his 12 disciples. So we always hear about the 12 disciples. What do we know about the times? Were there other disciples? Why didn't Jesus call out the others? Let's talk about that a little bit.
Well, we know that John the Baptist had a following, and he had disciples that believed in his theory, but he knew that there was one that was coming greater than him. And Jesus did not adopt his disciples. That's why it says here, Jesus' 12 disciples. So yeah, there were others, people that followed other people that came before Christ. So yeah, there were other disciples. You talking about before or after?
I'm talking about now.
Now,
Yeah,
yes.
I hear.
But even now, as they went about from town to town, you know what? I'm certain that there was people who hung on for various reasons.
Mm-hmm.
If it was no more than just to be blessed, you know, what he gave authority to the ones that he had been teaching, ones that he was there. Not only they were his disciple, he was their rabbi.
And the other thing about that, he often took them aside to explain things to them. He gave them a little special preparation.
Those were his homies.
His, as you said, his 12.
Yeah, his 12.
And
His
the
homies.
Yeah, and then at one time he sent out 72.
Yes.
So, and they went out 2 by 2s,
Mhm.
in 2s rather. So,
And he told them to make disciples of men. We're all disciples. We're not all
Yeah.
apostles. Apostles, he gave the authority to go and do what they did.
Well, let's look at question 6. We're going to jump down to question 6.
Okay.
So far, we see that the disciples were called. He called 12 of them. He called maybe more, but these 12 were called by name, and they're listed here
Right.
in the scripture. He authorized them,
That's it.
gave them authority, and then he sent them. He sent out the 72, but he also sent out the 12 to do some special things. And we're going to cover where he sent them and why in the next passage. But what's the significance of being called, authorized, and sent? And I guess my follow-up question is, if you're called, are you necessarily sent? Being called, authorized, and sent.
Well, the called, and then he authorized them, so he would send those. But if you're called, you may not be sent. You're right. You may not be sent, but you may be called. Because he assigns what he wants them to do. He gives gifts. Is that Ephesians? He gives gifts.
The spiritual gifts are in several passages.
Right.
The apostle Paul, who walked with Jesus spiritually as opposed to physically, talks about the spiritual gifts.
Yes.
Yeah. So you said that they may be called but not necessarily sent. Okay. I like that response. Anybody else?
You heard the thing, some were called and some just win.
oh yeah. Those people there.
Oh, goodness. Some of them call themselves.
Yeah.
I'm just saying. Okay.
Well, I think Pastor hit on it a couple of weeks ago when some people are called to do a certain thing. They may be called to minister, but they may not be called to pastor.
Yeah.
See, there's a difference. So you really have to go and ask and know that this is God's command for you to do. And some people will only take it on just because they think they're entitled to it.
Right.
And that may not be their gift.
I think that's why most of the mainstream denominations will send you through a period of discernment.
Mhm.
You are supervised and tested,
Mhm.
and you have to show yourself worthy
Mhm.
of that acceptance before you sent.
So is that the authorized part?
I think that might be the authorized part, where you're given authority, you're given preparation. So to look at that a little bit more closely, let's go back to question 3. The disciples were given authority to perform certain tasks
Mhm.
in Jesus' name.
Mhm.
Not that they had their own power,
Right.
but they were authorized to perform certain things in Jesus' name. So in the leadership literature, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the leadership literature. I'm sure some of you are. But there are different levels of authority. You know, you have the traditional legalistic authority, where your name is at the top of the organization chart and so forth, and your position is specified. And then there's charismatic leadership. You have a strong personality, and people are drawn to you. By virtue of your strong personality. It doesn't matter what the leader says,
Mhm.
unless the charismatic leader endorses that. The real leader or the authorized leader may have a few little problems,
Mhm.
because the charismatic leader doesn't support him. I'm not even going to get into the politics of that.
Okay.
And then there are the rational and legalistic people who are authorized. That would be bureaucratic authority.
Mhm.
They're legitimized. They enact the rules and regulations, such as government. And then we have another kind of authorization that Jesus gave. He gave them spiritual authority, and we saw some of that in the first chapters of Matthew, where he gave them spiritual authority. And I think the type of authority that Jesus is endowing on them is the spiritual authority. You know, he's designating, these are my disciples. And when you go out, I expect you to treat them in certain ways. So some of them have these other types of leadership, but I think the most important thing that Jesus gives them is this spiritual authority.
And even though we know that Jesus was everything, all things, and could do everything and be everywhere and all of that, usually when you are at the head of something, the first thing you do is start picking people
Mhm.
that can help you.
Yes.
You know, and there gotta be people that can represent you and what you're about. I think, as you mentioned. So that's why, like here, one of the first things we did was we needed to have deacons, but you couldn't just be a deacon unless you were already ordained. You needed to go through a year of study.
Mhm.
And I said very clearly, everybody ain't gonna make it,
Mhm.
or everybody might not make it.
Mhm.
You know, it's up to you, because it has to be the vision that I have for the church, not the vision you have for the church.
Yes.
You know, so.
Mhm. And can we go back to in 10? It says he called his 12 disciples and gave them authority over unclean spirits to throw them out, and to heal every disease and every sickness. So he gave them the power to heal. Now, that's where we're going to go back to that faith thing. Do you believe that I can do this?
Right.
And I think when some of the disciples actually enacted their authority to heal, I think it surprised them. I could do that.
I think it did surprise
I did.
us too.
I think it surprised. So he empowered others with some level of his authority to do some of the acts, so that it is not all on him.
Right.
Right.
And notice he did not authorize them to go and sit in the Sanhedrin council and
Right.
help them pass laws, new
Mhm.
laws.
Mhm.
He did not authorize them to do some of these other secular kinds of things
Mhm.
when people are given authority. But he authorized them to cast out unclean spirits, to throw them out and heal every disease and every sickness. Spiritual authority.
Mhm. Mhm.
I found this on the internet. It's Watchman Nee's
Yeah.
10 Commandments.
I'm familiar
that?
with Watchman
Okay.
Nee.
One of the things he says, God's delegated authority does not belong to the person exercising it. That person is just a channel
Mhm.
for him. Yeah.
Right, right, right.
Yes.
Anything else about this? Let's look at, I think the only question we really haven't touched upon. Look at the list of disciples in verses 2 through 4.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking about our previous Bible studies, and we've seen these disciples in action before, what can we conclude about a disciple's qualifications to serve as an authorized representative of Jesus? Any special qualifications?
They were all over the map.
They
We had a
were.
thief.
You
We
did.
had
Tax
a lawyer.
collector.
You did.
We had a
Fisherman.
politician.
Mm-hmm.
They said that one was a politician. Let me get
Yeah.
there we go. He got it.
Yeah.
He spoke.
Peter.
He spoke.
Peter.
First of all, when you, your name is important,
Right.
and so he gives a name, and he gives us, for some of us, a insight into their character and their background. So that's just like saying, if there are certain things, there are certain gifts that, you know what, I don't have any business trying to be involved in. But the tax collector may be able to do some things that I can't do. But then there are some things that I may be able to do. And then and what he did is, for this question too, what Jesus never strayed away from is the law of Moses. So he sends them out 2 by 2, cause for whatever take place, you need 2 or 3 for a witness.
Mm-hmm.
So Jesus never strays away from the Mosaic law.
But he was
That's a
not
good
looking
point.
for perfect people.
No.
Otherwise,
Are they perfect?
no.
No.
Okay.
I
And
haven't
then-
met him.
And then Jesus can use whatever you are and whoever you are
Exactly.
to bring him glory.
Mm-hmm.
So the qualification was just come as
That's
you
it.
are. Don't worry
Follow
about
me.
that you're the tax collector or that you got an attitude or that you like to fight.
Mhm.
You know, no. Just bring it on, and
Follow
I'll
me.
use that
Yeah.
for my glory.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Okay, anything else about verses 1 through 5a?
Yeah, I found it in, we're not going to go through it, but it'd be interesting if you look up and look at Ellicott's commentary for the English readers about the disciples. And it talks about how they are named in the order in which Jesus had picked them. And that, the first 4 was his innermost circle. And then he talks about Philip is the first and the second group, and he too came from Bethsaida. It gives you details about the different groups and how he picked them. So he had a method to his madness about how they were to serve. And it was very interesting.
Okay, anything else? Notice that the core group went with him everywhere. They went with him to places that the others did not go. Peter, James, and John in particular were his close companions. And he tried to reveal things to Peter, James, and John that sometimes they just didn't get. They had to spend a little bit more time with the master teacher before it sunk in. They needed a little bit more spiritual teaching. So we'll look at that later on too.
Yes, I bet.
All right, let's move on. Matthew 10b through 15. Joyce, would you read that for us from the CEB, from the right-hand column?
Don't go among the Gentiles or into a Samaritan city. Go instead to the lost sheep, the people of Israel. As you go, make this announcement. The kingdom of heaven has come near. Heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse those with skin diseases, and throw out demons. You receive without having to pay. Therefore, give without demanding payment. Workers deserve to be fed, so don't gather gold or silver or copper coins for your money belt to take on your trips. Don't take a backpack for the road or 2 shirts or sandals or a walking stick. Whatever city or village you go into, find somebody in it who is worthy and stay there until you go on your way. When you go into a house, say peace. If the house is worthy, give it your blessing of peace. But if the house isn't worthy, take back your blessing. If anyone refuses to welcome you or listen to your words, shake the dust off your feet as you leave that house or city. I assure you that it will be more bearable for the land of Sodom and Gomorrah on Judgment Day than it will be for that city.
Okay. Reactions. Reactions to that.
Well, you know what? When he starts off and he talks about, and he gives them a sign not to go to the Gentiles, but go to the lost sheep of Israel. You know what? As that applies to our lives today, you know what we do? A lot of us, we come to Christ and we want to tell everybody about Jesus. But you know what? We got people right in our own house that we're not saying anything to. So the first thing he did, he was like, say, we got folks right around here, that's right here. So we're gonna go to them. We need to go to them first. Before we take this word to any place else. Let's start right here with our own people. And that's what, like, a lot of these lessons, we have to make them apply to our everyday life.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's an excellent point.
Mm-hmm. And also in here, this is the part that I underline in 8. Heal the sick, raise the dead. Now when we go back to 10:1 through 5, or 10, the first verse, he said he only gave them authority over unclean spirits to throw them out and to heal every disease and every sickness. And I thought, oh, so he didn't give them the authority to raise the dead. But then here we are in chapter 10. He did give them the authority to raise the dead.
And then he goes on further. He says, when he talks about it in 8, he say, I give you the authority to perform these miracles. You know what you have to do? You have to have something that's gonna pique people's interest. You know, you just can't go out there and say, I know a man. You know what you have to do? You got to tell them something that's gonna hold their attention for a while. And that's what these signs and miracles do. And you know what, just like some of us, you know what, we didn't get signs and miracles, but you know what, we got peace in our minds and our hearts. And we was like saying, damn, this is what I got to look forward to. I take this rather than to take money. And so he goes on. Then he tells them just like this, you know what, what he gave them, tells them, ain't no amount of money worth it. Don't take no money. See, a lot of things that when we do something, we want to get paid.
We got to get paid.
I think he was telling me don't take the money with you.
No.
So you can take care of yourself. Read
It says,
what number is that?
you receive
Without
having to pay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Therefore, give without demanding payment.
Amen.
Without
So
pay.
the things that you're doing for the people, don't expect them to pay
Pay
for
for
it,
it.
because you've been freed up and you didn't have to pay anything for it.
And then he talks about all the things of value back then, gold, silver, and copper. He's talking about money.
Then he said you're supposed to get fed though.
Right.
But-
He goes on to tell them, but he explains all that to them. Just like then he goes on to tell them, he says, look, don't take nothing with you. I've already equipped you with everything that you need. I'm sending you out the door with it. So don't even take a extra pair of underwear or
clothes.
socks. I've given you everything
I
that
don't
you
know if he
need.
said that.
Yeah, that's what he said. That's what he
Can I offer
said.
a different perspective? I think you got to get the context, what was going on at the time. You know, the Hebrews were a nomadic society. They moved around. You know, they did not have any established authority other than what was given them in the past. And so they were trying to find themselves. And so when you have a situation like that, there's always this need for the people who don't have it to want something, because that's what they've been fed. Their value system was jacked up, you know. And so in order for the people to recognize that these are legitimate disciples of Christ versus charlatans, these people, the legitimate people, don't want any money, because the charlatans will go out there pretending to disciples of Christ and say, okay, now you need to pay. I get to see them doing it.
Right.
He was asking them to sow a seed in the ministry.
Right.
And then, you know what, it's so much in there. Then when he tells them like this, he says, when he talks about the houses that they go into, you know what, he has to teach them, you know what, they got to be able to distinguish where they are going, because every house is not good. Because you got good people for the modern day person, you got good people, the dope house, the house of ill repute, all of them could be on the same block. You have to be able to distinguish and discern which one am I going to go into, which one I'm going to lay my head in.
Because he says, if the house is worthy, give it your blessing. How do we know if the house is worthy?
If they're receptive.
Right.
Yeah.
Are they receptive to what you bring? You're the Avon group.
Right.
They're the Avon people. They ring the doorbell. You know, I'm going to tell you about this. Yeah, well, you're coming in. I want to hear more about it. Or, what you got? Can I have whatever it is you have? You know, you can tell from the beginning whether you want to be in that house.
Because if I'm drinking and high, I don't want to hear about Jesus right now. This like, you know, sorry, brother, this ain't the time or the place. You know.
You probably won't go to the door in the first place. So.
Yeah,
Because you might find a house where they're not drinking and drugging and all of that, and they just as mean as I don't know
Yes,
what.
they are.
And I would take my piece.
But
of
you know
that.
what? But at least you talking to somebody that's in the right
In the right frame of mind.
Right. So these are the things. It's a lot of ways you have to. He's telling them in here how to discern themselves. You know. And then, and just like you say, it says like that. He say, "It's some gonna refuse you."
Right.
Yeah.
Them, it's some. There's ain't nothing gonna be wrong. They just gonna flat out refuse you. He say, "Just keep it moving."
That's right. Keep it moving.
Okay, good insights. Let's look at question 1. Why do you think the initial assignment was to appeal only to the lost sheep of Israel? And we're talking about in Jesus' time. Now, we all know the answer, but let's just lift it up.
Well, somebody really expounded on that.
He talked about the modern day, though.
Oh, okay.
Greg did. But back in Jesus' time, why do you think the initial assignment was to appeal only to the lost sheep of Israel?
Because supposedly they knew who their ancestors were, they knew who God was, and so they should be more receptive to the word because that was their religion. That is what, if we're talking on common ground, you go to the people that are like you first before you take your message out to the world, and supposedly they should be able to understand your speech.
Okay.
And Greg had used the example of family.
Yes.
Right.
That instead of us going out all the time, always talking about somebody else, we need to deal with our household. And so to deal with the lost sheep of Israel, they needed to know what the ministry was about, the mission was, before you take it somewhere else.
Isaiah also talked about the fact that many of the descendants of the tribes, the 12 tribes, would not want to hear the message, but you still had to present it to them first. I guess there was an obligation to make sure they had the chance to take advantage of this salvation before it was offered to everyone else.
And they all talked about our father Abraham, so they all had something in common. So you should be able to, if you speak something new and it is of God, they should be able to hear the message first, because that is our family.
Yeah, it's very similar to what Greg was saying about the modern day. Take it to family first.
And the Bible talks about his assignment was to come to the children of Israel first. Just like when he talks to the lady about the crumbs at the table, he tells her directly that his job was first to come to feed his own people.
Right.
I remember before Michael joined church and really started trying to, have a relationship with Christ, when I would be preparing a sermon, I would run it past him. So I'd read the scripture. What does that say to you? What would you want to know? What would make you feel good and comfortable about those words? So to me, that's kind of, I mean, I'm not saying he was lost. I don't want to put that label
He
on
wants
him
to know
per
how,
se,
he wanted to know
but
how it's going to be accepted.
he wasn't at church. He wasn't at church, so.
Let's look
Matthew
at questions.
28 says that God wants everybody.
Amen.
Yeah,
He wants everyone, whether they're in church or not.
yeah.
Right.
So we had to at least offer. Yeah. So hospitality was a sacred obligation in the ancient world.
Mhm.
What does hospitality look like for the 21st century disciples? What would you expect? You're going out here, you are obeying, you're being obedient. What would you expect in terms of hospitality? I wouldn't expect a meal every time I went in somebody's house.
Hospitality would be made to be accepted to the church and everybody surrounding.
Okay, I like that.
You know what? Hospitality, you know what? In Leviticus, when they talks about hospitality, they not talking about the church folks, because we got some church, at our church, we got what you call a hospitality ministry. But hospitality was, how do you treat your neighbor? How do you treat the stranger? These are the things that the Jewish customs did, even just like even in the fields, when they harvest the field, part of the law was like, you leave some for strangers and the poor folks. These are the things. How do you treat how do you treat people when you on the outside of these walls?
And it's always talked about with the Southern hospitality, because regardless of whether you friend or family, when you go to Southern hospitality, they're going to treat you like family regardless. You know, they're going to break out the meal, give you a place to stay. They don't expect anything in return. And
And then it also
hospitality
talks
is
about
experience.
the traveler. In Leviticus, it talks about the traveler. You supposed to, what she say, when you're the sojourner, you give them a meal. You might even need a place to stay for the night.
Right.
That's all what they talking about. How you treat your fellow man.
Okay.
And right now, we're not gonna just invite anybody in.
Right.
You know, we don't have that, but if you see somebody standing on the corner and they've got bags and you're going that way, or even if you're going out of your way, you might want to give them a ride. You can do something like that. Or, you know, people have a tendency to speak negative about young men that have their pants slacked down. And if you treat them, hey, my brother, how are you today? Or something like that, they're very polite people. They're just trying to keep up with this thing to be a part of something that we don't understand. Because I understand this thing been out since '95, and that's a long time for fashion.
Right.
And we have to understand and treat them like we would like to be treated.
I agree.
Give them some twos and threes if you got it.
I agree. Juanita, was it you or someone else who said they either knew someone or they kept a supply of cheese and crackers in their glove compartment? And when homeless people would come up to the window saying they were hungry, this person would go into the glove compartment and give them a pack of cheese and crackers, and whether they accepted it or not would tell you whether they were really hungry and homeless or not.
Yeah, I didn't have cheese and crackers. I always kept money, singles, in my glove compartment. And when I came upon a homeless person, you know, and they were, you know, begging, I would put the $1 or $2 in. And if I really felt it, I'd give them the whole wad and just throw it in there. Bless you, bless you. Like, okay, now I got to get some more money.
Anything else on this point? Let's move on to the last question. Jesus sent his disciples out on a mission of preaching and healing that is modeled on his own acts of ministry. In other words, he had to demonstrate to them how that looked. Some of them paid attention most of the time. Some of them didn't and had to go through the lesson again and again, just like any of us disciples. In this way, the disciples continue the work that Jesus began. In many ways, this passage points ahead to the mission of the church in every age. Discuss aspects of the passage that may or may not apply to 21st century discipleship. The mission of the church in the present age. I'm thinking about old time religion. I grew up in a traditional Baptist church, and they had certain ways they did things. Old time religion. And when all of this newfangled stuff, they just had a fit when Kirk Franklin started singing his music. And you brought all this dancing, this praise dancing. What's that? What's that about? Into the church. Sometimes the old time religion doesn't appeal to the new folks. So what can we do about that? How do we adjust our practices so we can appeal to the younger people and not run them away?
Well, first you have to listen to them.
I like that.
First you have to listen to them. You have to have a relation. Here we go with relationship. You have to establish a relationship. They have to believe that you are earnestly looking for a solution for them.
Yeah.
They want to comply, but they don't understand us and we don't understand them. So we have to open up the lines of communication with the young people.
Okay.
And not judge them on what their culture in their time is like. You can't judge them on that. You know, I remember back in the day, you know how we started off. I remember back in the day, but we were young to our parents.
Right.
Right? And they thought that we were crazy. So.
And they see, I agree, you know, some of the things that, you know, the way we teach gotta be reformed to where they could understand it. You know, that's just like when Jesus talks about the day of judgment, it's gotta be, they have to be taught about Sodom and Gomorrah before we could just throw it in their lap. We have to communicate with them enough to get them in their Bible study where they can know more about Sodom and Gomorrah.
I like that. You can't expect them to conform to something that they don't know anything about. So you first have to teach them. Yeah, Joyce.
There's a particular pastor I like to listen to, and he made the part in here about knock the dust off your feet, and so he referred it to Tyler Swift, Shake It Off. And so I listened to another one where these people were rebutting what he was saying. They spent a half hour knocking this guy down, saying that was blasphemy for him to say something like that. And I'm thinking, you know, he's reaching people. He's explained things that other people have talked about that I got just listening to him. And you just have to have, you know, be able to reach out to different people on different levels.
Yeah.
Instead of, you know, sticking to whatever your old way was.
Yeah. Good discussion. We've run out of time for tonight, but I hope that we're able to discern some of the major lessons from these scriptures and incorporate them into our own discipleship. Thank you for joining us, those of you who tuned in over the internet. If you are without a church home, we would love to have you worship with us at Grace, 2500 223rd Street in Sauk Village. Sunday school begins at 9:30. Worship service begins at 11 a.m. Please come join us. Until we meet again.